Hey, everyone, and welcome back. We're going to take a deep dive today into a pretty complex world, the global energy market. We'll also be talking about international politics. And we'll be hearing a lot from Donald Trump and his recent pronouncements about all this. We've got a lot to unpack here, including Trump's ideas about oil prices, OPEC, and, of course, the conflict in Ukraine.
Right.
And we're going to be looking at some of the forces shaping global energy production and consumption. Buckle up, folks.
Yeah, it's fascinating how Trump, when he was speaking online at the World Economic Forum, connected a $45 per barrel oil price with ending the Russia-Ukraine conflict. He seems to be implying that lower oil prices would somehow force a resolution to the war.
So he's saying that if we can get oil down to $45 a barrel, the war will just end.
Yeah, that seems to be the gist of his argument.
That's a pretty bold claim.
It is.
I mean, it makes you wonder if that's even possible.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider how much Russia depends on oil revenue to fund its military.
Exactly. To get to a $45 oil price, you'd need some pretty big changes in global supply and demand. And it's not clear if any single country or even a group like OPEC has that much power to make that happen.
So you're saying they can't just snap their fingers and make oil $45 a barrel?
Not quite. It's a lot more complicated than that.
Okay, so it's not just about Russia. I mean, if oil prices drop that low, wouldn't it affect the whole global economy? I'm talking about things like what people spend, government budgets, the whole nine yards.
Absolutely. You're talking about a complex web of interconnected factors. Any attempt to manipulate oil prices is going to have unintended consequences. It's like a ripple effect.
Speaking of Trump and his ideas, he's bringing back some familiar themes like praising the Saudi crown prince. He even asked Saudi Arabia to increase investment in the U.S., and he threw out a $1 trillion figure.
Right.
It reminded me of that story where he asked someone for $1 million, you know?
I remember that.
But now he's up the ante.
Well, that $1 trillion figure definitely got people's attention. But the reality is, existing Saudi investment plans in the U.S. are already around $600 billion over the next few years. So the extra investment Trump's asking for is probably closer to hundreds of billions, not a whole trillion.
Hundreds of billions is still a lot of money, though.
Oh, absolutely.
But here's what I find interesting. Trump criticizes Biden's energy policies, but then he seems to be suggesting similar actions. He wants more oil production and lower prices. Like, how does that even work?
It does seem contradictory. And I think it highlights how complicated global oil markets are. OPEC might have some influence, but they don't have complete control over prices.
So they can't just dictate what the price of oil is going to be?
No, they can't.
Okay.
There are a lot of factors that determine prices, demand, the cost of production, and even things like geopolitics, like the war in Ukraine.
It's like a giant puzzle, isn't it?
It is.
Now, this war in Ukraine wouldn't lower oil prices help China, since they're a major oil importer. That seems a little ironic, considering the U.S. and China are often on opposite sides of things.
That's true. Lower oil prices would be a good thing for China's economy. But to get those lower prices, you'd need to increase oil production. And that's not a simple process.
It's not like turning on a faucet?
No, not at all. It takes time and investment. And if prices are too low, it can actually discourage companies from investing in new production. Then you might end up with shortages in the future.
It's a delicate balance, for sure.
It is.
Hey, remember that awkward moment between Trump and the guy from Total Energies at the WEF?
Mm-hmm.
That executive basically said that increasing U.S. LNG exports might actually raise global gas prices, not lower them.
Oh, yeah, that was interesting.
That was pretty uncomfortable.
I think that exchange showed just how important it is to really understand the energy market. Total Energies exports a lot of American LNG, so they have a big stake in U.S. energy policy. Trump said that the holdups in LNG project approvals under Biden were causing a supply problem. But the reality is those delays were mostly for projects that are years away, not the ones that are already being built.
So more LNG projects won't automatically mean lower gas prices. It seems like that goes against the whole supply and demand thing, doesn't it?
Yeah, you're right. When the U.S. exports more LNG, it can actually push up domestic gas prices because those prices become more closely tied to the higher prices in Europe and Asia. So American producers might benefit, but American consumers might end up paying more for energy.
Wait a minute, because now things get really interesting. Trump says he could just declare a national emergency and approve all these energy projects himself. He wants to double energy production and build generation for AI. Is he even allowed to do that?
Well, that raises some big questions about how much power the president has, especially when it comes to energy policy. And there's a bit of a contradiction in what Trump's saying. He says the U.S. is a net exporter of oil, But then he says he wants to double production mainly to meet domestic needs.
So why double production if we're already exporting oil?
Well, you have to remember that different types of crude oil are used for different things. Not all the oil produced in the U.S. can be refined here. It's a reminder that energy independence is complicated. It's not just about how much oil we produce. You also have to consider the specific needs of each market.
And then there's that magic number, $45 a barrel. Some people think it has something to do with 1945 and the end of World War II. Historical significance and all that.
That's an interesting theory. But maybe it's something simpler. Maybe the number 45 just means something to Trump personally, since he was the 45th president.
Maybe he just really likes the number 45. But here's another thing that's changed. Bloomberg's coverage. Remember how they used to be all about Biden's energy policies? Now they're a lot more critical, especially about whether it's even possible to increase oil production and lower prices at the same time.
It seems like Bloomberg is being more careful and critical now that Trump might be president again, especially when it comes to energy.
And get this shift in Bloomberg's tone seems to have happened around the same time as Trump's executive order on gender identity. Just an observation. But the timing is kind of strange, don't you think?
It does make you wonder about the relationship between politicians and the media and how that might affect how they cover complex issues like energy policy.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground. Trump's ideas on oil prices, the whole thing with LNG exports, Saudi investments. It's clear that the world of energy and geopolitics is anything but simple.
It's a lot to take in.
It is, but stick with us as we keep digging into this fascinating and often confusing world of energy markets and international affairs.
As you think about all this, it's important to consider what these pronouncements might mean in the long run. What could be the impact on global energy security, international relations, and the balance of power in the world? It's kind of like Trump's whole approach to energy. Bold statements, simple solutions for really complicated problems.
Yeah, you'd think more production automatically means lower prices, but it's not that easy, is it?
Not even close. You've got to think about investment cycles, transportation, refining capacity, and of course, global demand. So many moving parts.
Right. And what about the environmental side of things? Trump's all gung-ho about bringing back coal, which is...
Yeah, that opens up a whole other can of worms, doesn't it?
It's like he wants to go back to the good old days when energy was simpler, but also way worse for the planet.
He keeps talking about American energy dominance, but at what cost? Not just to the environment, but to global energy markets in the long run.
That's a good point. So what does all this mean for regular people, the ones paying for gas and heating their homes?
That's the key question, right? Sure, more production and lower prices sound good, but there could be downsides. What if these policies end up making things more expensive for Americans down the line?
And what about the shift to cleaner energy? Will that stall out?
It's a gamble, that's for sure. And the stakes are high. The economy, energy security, America's global standing.
Let's not forget about the international angle. Trump saying lower oil prices will end the war in Ukraine. It sounds nice, but...
But it's oversimplifying things.
Yeah, it's way more complicated than that.
It's not just about economics. You have to consider the history, the alliances, the human cost.
He's acting like it's a simple math problem.
Exactly. This just shows how energy and international relations are tied together. You can't change one without affecting the other.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what are the main takeaways for our listeners? What should they be thinking about as they try to make sense of all this?
Well, first of all, don't fall for easy answers to complicated problems. The global energy market is incredibly complex.
It's a bit like that Jenga game. You pull out the wrong piece, and the whole thing collapses.
Exactly. And second, think about the long-term consequences. What seems like a quick fix today could have unintended effects years down the road.
And we can't forget that energy is a global issue. What happens in one place affects everyone else.
Right. It's about economics, geopolitics, and the environment. All connected.
So if you're listening, it's important to stay informed, ask questions, and demand solutions that address these complexities.
Because at the end of the day, this is about our future. The choices we make now will affect generations to come.
So where do we go from here? I mean, how do we make sense of all this? All these promises about energy, especially with Trump back in the mix?
That's a big question, isn't it? I think we need to be a little skeptical, Don't just take things at face value. Look deeper into the data, see what's really going on.
So, do your own research. Check different sources. Find people who aren't afraid to challenge the usual narratives.
Exactly. And watch out for anyone who says they have a simple solution to these really complex problems. Energy is tied to everything. The economy, politics, technology, there are no easy answers.
Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive, what should our listeners be watching for? What are the big questions we need to be asking ourselves?
Well, keep an eye on how the global energy market reacts to all these pronouncements and policy changes. Will more production actually lead to lower prices? Or will other things get in the way?
And what about the environmental impact? Will this be a step backward for clean energy? Will we see a revival of fossil fuels?
These are all crucial questions, and the answers aren't so simple. It's a mix of market forces, technology, and political will. It's a reminder that energy isn't just about numbers and barrels of oil, it's about people, communities, the future of the planet.
As informed citizens, we have a responsibility to be part of this conversation. We need to demand transparency and accountability from our leaders, and we need to advocate for policies that promote both energy security and environmental sustainability.
Absolutely. Our future is at stake here. The choices we make today will have a ripple effect for generations to come.
So stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking the tough questions. That's the best way to navigate this ever-changing world.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, that's it for our deep dive into energy and geopolitics. We hope you found it insightful, informative, and maybe even a little entertaining.
And as always, we encourage you to keep learning and exploring. Seek out different viewpoints and don't be afraid to question your own assumptions.
The more we understand about these complex issues, the better equipped we'll be to deal with them and build a more sustainable and equitable future. Until next time, stay curious.